Before this video goes any further, I want you to pause for a second. If you are watching this while feeling tired, confused, or emotionally heavy after dealing with someone you care about, do not click away. Because if you've ever told yourself it's not that bad while your chest felt tight at night, this video is about you. And if you're watching this thinking, this doesn't apply to me, but someone else's silence has been living rent-free in your mind, then this video is also about you. Please don't treat this like background noise. Someone out there didn't survive emotionally because they ignored what we're about to talk about. Stay. Dating doesn't always hurt loudly. Sometimes it doesn't come with shouting. Sometimes there's no betrayal you can point to, no dramatic ending, no clear reason to leave. Sometimes it looks normal on the outside. Two people talking, laughing, planning, texting good morning, saying, I miss you. And yet, something inside you starts to disappear. Not all at once. Slowly, you start questioning things you never questioned before. You reread messages. You wait longer than you should. You explain away behavior that doesn't feel right. And the most dangerous part, you don't call it pain. You call it love. You call it patience. You call it trying. This is not a video about bad people. This is a video about what happens inside the human mind when emotional connection becomes emotionally unsafe. Because dating doesn't just affect who you love. It affects how you sleep, how you think, how you see yourself when you're alone. And many people don't realize something is wrong until they no longer recognize themselves. If at any point during this video you think of someone else, I want you to ask yourself something uncomfortable. Why not me? That's where the story shifts. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to make you feel unsure. And unsure is where mental health begins to suffer. We'll continue from here, because what happens next is where most people start blaming themselves for something that was never their fault. Before we go further, I want to ask you something gently. If this feels familiar, don't punish yourself by ignoring it. Awareness is not weakness, it's protection. Stay with this story, not for entertainment, but because understanding it might change how you protect your peace. At some point, something changes. Not enough to end things, not enough to clearly name, just enough to be felt. Replies take longer, plans become less certain. The tone shifts slightly, but when you ask, everything is fine. And this is where the mind begins its quiet work. Because humans are meaning-making creatures. When patterns change without explanation, the brain looks inward. Did I say something wrong? Did I ask for too much? Am I being needy? You replay conversations, not because you want drama, but because your nervous system is trying to restore balance. Inconsistency does something subtle to the human psyche. It doesn't push you away. It pulls you closer. When attention becomes unpredictable, the brain treats it as unfinished business. It stays alert, it waits, it watches. You start checking your phone without realizing you picked it up. You notice the time more than you used to. Your mood begins to respond to small signals. A short reply can lift you. Silence can sink you. And slowly, your emotional state becomes dependent on someone else's availability, not because you are weak, but because the brain is trying to resolve uncertainty. This is the moment where many people lose clarity, because nothing terrible has happened. There's no argument to point to, no betrayal to justify your discomfort, just a growing sense that you are no longer standing on solid ground. And when the ground feels unstable, the mind doesn't run. It adapts. You tell yourself to be patient. You minimize your feelings. You lower your expectations quietly. You begin negotiating with yourself instead of asking for what you need. And the most damaging thought begins to form. If I were easier, this would feel better. Self-blame rarely arrives aggressively. It comes in polite thoughts. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe this is just how dating is. Maybe I need to calm down. You start editing yourself. You type messages, then delete them. You hesitate before expressing emotion. You rehearse being low maintenance, not because it feels right, but because it feels safer. And here's the psychological truth most people never hear. When someone's behavior becomes inconsistent, the brain often assumes responsibility because responsibility creates the illusion of control. If it's your fault, then you can fix it. So you try. You become more understanding, more flexible, more available. You ignore the quiet cost. Over time, this internal negotiation erodes something important, your sense of self. You stop asking, how does this feel to me? And start asking, how do I keep this from falling apart? That shift from self-awareness to self-monitoring is where emotional exhaustion begins. Your mind stays busy, your body stays tense, your thoughts circle. And because nothing is visibly wrong, you tell yourself you're being dramatic, but your nervous system knows better. People often think mental health damage comes from obvious harm, but more often it comes from prolonged uncertainty, from waiting, from guessing, from holding emotional weight alone. And the longer this continues, the more normal it starts to feel, which is the most dangerous part. Eventually, your body adapts to the stress, but adaptation is not healing. You become alert without realizing it, sensitive to tone, reactive to silence. Your mind stays slightly ahead of the present moment, anticipating disappointment, hoping for reassurance. You may still laugh, still function, still show up, but internally, something feels strained. Sleep doesn't feel as restful. Joy feels conditional. Peace feels temporary. And you begin to confuse intensity with connection, because when calm disappears, even emotional tension can feel like closeness. This is not love failing. This is emotional safety being compromised. And no amount of effort can repair safety if the environment itself remains unstable. Yet many people stay here longer than they should because they believe endurance equals commitment, because leaving feels like failure, because they don't want to admit that something which started beautifully is now hurting them quietly. And the mind does what it always does under prolonged stress. It narrows. Your world begins to orbit one relationship, one person, one unresolved question. And without noticing, you drift further away from yourself. We'll stop here for now. Next, the story moves into normalizing pain, how humans justify staying, and why hope, when unsupported by change, can become a trap. When you're ready, say, continue. There comes a point where the discomfort stops feeling alarming, not because it's gone, but because you've learned how to live inside it. You stop noticing the tension in your shoulders. You stop questioning why you feel uneasy after conversations. You stop asking whether this dynamic is healthy. You adapt. Humans are remarkably good at adapting to emotional environments, even harmful ones, especially when leaving feels uncertain and staying feels familiar. You begin explaining things away. They're busy. They're stressed. Relationships aren't supposed to be easy. And those statements may be true, but truth without context can still cause harm. Because what you're really doing is teaching your nervous system that discomfort is something to tolerate, not address. Hope keeps you here. Not loud hope, quiet hope. Hope that things will return to how they were. Hope that effort will be noticed. Hope that patience will be rewarded. And hope can be a beautiful thing, but when hope exists without consistency, it stops being healing. It becomes a reason to delay listening to yourself. This is how people stay longer than they should, not because they don't see the problem, but because they keep remembering the beginning. and beginnings can be very convincing. By now, the cost is no longer emotional confusion alone. It's fatigue, not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that lives behind your eyes. You feel drained after interactions that used to energize you. You replay conversations without meaning to. You feel emotionally busy, even when nothing is happening. This is what prolonged emotional uncertainty does to the mind. It keeps the stress response active, and when the body stays in that state long enough, it begins to affect everything else. Focus becomes harder. Joy feels distant. Confidence weakens quietly. You may still function well on the outside. Many people do, but inside, there's a constant low-level tension, like something unresolved that never gets closure. This is why people say, I don't feel like myself anymore. Not because they've changed fundamentally, but because their emotional energy has been redirected toward managing instability. And no human thrives in an environment where they must constantly monitor connection. Mental health doesn't collapse overnight. It erodes, and often it erodes in places where love was supposed to feel safe. Awareness doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly in moments of honesty with yourself. You begin noticing patterns instead of isolated events. You notice how often you feel anxious versus calm. You notice how much effort it takes to feel secure. And slowly, a question forms, not about them, but about you. Why does this cost me so much peace? This question matters because love should expand your sense of self, not require you to shrink parts of it to maintain connection. Awareness doesn't mean immediate action. It doesn't mean confrontation. It doesn't mean endings. It simply means clarity. And clarity is the beginning of emotional protection. When you recognize that something is affecting your mental health, you reclaim agency. You stop framing pain as personal failure and start seeing it as information. Your emotions are not exaggerations. They are signals. Healing doesn't always look like leaving. Sometimes it looks like listening. Listening to what your body has been communicating long before your mind was ready to hear it. It looks like honoring your need for consistency, for clarity, for emotional safety, not because you are demanding, but because you are human. Dating should not require you to constantly brace yourself. Connection should not feel like emotional labor you perform alone. And the moment you realize that peace matters more than potential, something shifts. Not outwardly, internally. You begin returning to yourself. And that return, even if quiet, is powerful. If this video describes something you're living through, don't betray yourself by dismissing it. You wouldn't ignore physical pain that lasts this long. Your emotional pain deserves the same respect. Understanding is not the end of the journey, but it is the moment you stop pretending everything is fine. And that moment matters more than you think. Subscribe, like, comment, and share.